Hey Digital World students, this is a lecture and an overview of what we're going to be getting started on next week, where we kind of motor into our final phase of the course where you're tasked with creating an original piece of research or a creative project where you either make or test a different piece of media using and applying some of the concepts that we've learned in this course. This is just going to be kind of an overview of that kind of long form assignment and how it'll break up with class discussion and different interactions. Um, and you guys will get kind of the full breadth of the assignment next week, where you'll be able to see week to week what you're responsible for, and you'll be able to kind of see the rubrics and the breakdowns for everything that we're going to be doing with this project. This week for assignment wise, we're just going to be doing some discussion and kind of thinking about what we might want to research or make. So let's get started.
So in our study of the digital world, we've come across a lot of different concepts, and we've looked at them in a few kind of research theory-oriented ways, as well as some more applied-oriented ways, like the prototyping and the usability testing example that you guys had a couple weeks back. And today you guys are going to pick a path for the rest of the semester, for the last 3 weeks that we have. You are either going to pick the path of a research project or the one of a creative project. Both of these assignments are going to test your ability to apply the concepts that we've learned in class, specifically to a body of research that you're interested in, something that you either want to make or want to write about in some capacity. So if you choose the path of research, you're looking at constructing a minimum of 1,000-word paper to kind of apply some of the concepts that you've learned in some sort of research that you'd like to do. So if you're interested in usability and you wanted to look into how usability is being construed or constructed in our contemporary digital world, that could be one project. Or if you wanted to research how video, for instance, as a type of media works within, say, different transmedia paradigms or different associative networks like Facebook or other social platforms, things like that. Do research into that. That could be a potential research project. Really, any topic of research that you're interested in, so long as it applies to some of the concepts that we've looked at in class, which I'm going to detail in a few slides. So that's one approach, is the research project. You can also take a creative path where you either make something new in media, test a piece of existing media, or you do some sort of other creative application with media, digital media within this digital world, kind of attaching them to concepts that we've learned throughout the class. With this creative project, you'd be making something or testing something. So in relationship to that, there's also a 300-word postmortem that describes how you applied kind of some of the concepts you learned in class to construct this creative project, which I'll kind of detail a little bit further below. Now, before I get into some of the topic areas, I wanted to kind of detail the differences in the approach of each of these projects. So with a research project, obviously you're going to be doing a lot of research. You're going to be consulting a lot of existing literature and or documentation on digital media projects or digital media concepts that you're kind of looking at. And you're basically trying to explain how one of our class concepts works in practice in some way. This could apply to your potential professional career or a personal endeavor that you have or are interested in. You know, anything is kind of plausible here so long as you're engaging a concept in the class. And then by extension of that, kind of making an argument associated with one of these concepts in relationship to the topic that you decide. If you go the creative project route, you're going to apply concepts we've learned with media that you make or test. This is going to kind of serve as a case study in how you apply some of these concepts to your own media making. If you were going to kind of go on to be someone who wanted to work professionally in constructing and producing media, this might be a good path for you. One kind of tenet of this creative project is that unlike the research project where you're using kind of various scholars and other professional resources as credibility for your project, the creative projects will be informed by feedback that you get from potential users or consumers of a media project like this that kind of informs how you make or test what you're doing. So we've covered a lot of different concepts in this class in various ways, either applied or just in kind of conceptual theory sorts of ways. But here's a big list of just some kind of terms and buzzwords and concepts that we looked at throughout the course of the class. And really anything that you can kind of think within this digital world to kind of either research or make something new, test something that kind of applies to these concepts is fair game for this project. In this first week, you guys are going to pitch these to me, so I'm going to be kind of giving you feedback week to week on how you should kind of update or augment what you're trying to do based on rigor and credibility and kind of like having an effective project based on any of these concepts. During the course of this week, I'm going to be writing up a primer on what the parameters for each assignment is going to be, and I'll have a rubric associated with each of those things so you guys can see the point breakdown for this final project. But this is kind of the bare minimum project parameters for each project. So if you're interested in research, this is a 1,000-word paper. It's 4 pages double spaced with a minimum of 4 credible sources. And this credible sources thing is something I'm going to be really taking you guys to task on. If you're going for the research, I'm going to be having you guys do an annotated bibliography of your sources, which kind of gives a summarization and a contextualization for what that person is writing, as well as how it applies to your project. And when I give you guys feedback on these things, I'm going to be looking at your sources and probably seeing how logical your argument is based on the sources that you're kind of utilizing. And the goal here is to synthesize information from sources and kind of produce some sort of new scholarship about a topic of research that you're interested in. And the ultimate question that you should be looking to answer within this research is, how does your research inform, complicate, enable, or otherwise affect the world? So how is what you're doing kind of either a comment upon or a illustration of something in culture or something in technology, and how these concepts from class can kind of apply to that. Now, if you're going the creative project route, it takes a bit of a different approach in terms of rather than having a minimum word count for your project, you've got a minimum of 2 prototypes. You guys did a brief prototyping exercise a couple weeks back. For this project, I'm going to be looking in the first week for a pitch from you that kind of indicates what you'll be looking to build, and we'll be going back and forth with feedback about what is kind of something to pull off within the time frame that we have. But as a minimum, you're going to need 2 prototypes, one being kind of an initial prototype that you start off with, and then the kind of final high fidelity version of that prototype of your final project, which we'll get through in the next couple weeks as we kind of go back and forth and figure out what you're going to be making. A big part of the creative project is kind of getting user feedback on your project and kind of illustrating that feedback somehow in your final version of the project so that you can show kind of what audience response was to your project and kind of what user feedback could look like with that. And you'll show that to me in a post-mortem of the creative project where you kind of contextualize that user feedback with what you did in the project and how you use concepts from the class to kind of harness that project a little bit. So you're trying to kind of contextualize what you've learned in the class with something that you'd like to make by way of kind of getting user feedback and kind of understanding what other people's user wants and needs might be for that project.
So here's how the overall timeline breaks down for this project, whether it's research or creative. Every couple weeks after this week, you guys will have something due related to this project, and for the weeks kind of in between, we'll be doing some class and group interaction discussion, kind of talking about what you guys are working on in your projects. But for the most part, you'll have an initial concept or pitch. Whether if it's research, you're going to be doing finding cited sources and trying to kind of craft the arguments, the major arguments that you want to make in the first due date. And then after you get some feedback from me as well as from the class, you'll write a complete full first rough draft of that research, which includes all your sources of support. And then your final research draft at the kind of toward the tail end of the semester. We'll have about a week left. Similarly, with the creative project, you'll start with a 300-word pitch, kind of describing what you plan to make, test, or augment. And then a couple weeks later, you'll have a low fidelity prototype due of that creative project, with some user feedback that you've received on your prototype, or the usability study that you've created, or basically getting users engaged with what you're making or testing. And then you'll have kind of the final high fidelity prototype with a 300-word post-mortem, kind of detailing exactly what you did in your study and contextualizing a lot of the concepts that we've learned in class. So that's kind of how the timeline breaks down for this project. You guys will have a couple weeks for each part of this, and in the interim weeks you will have class interaction and discussion, kind of talking about what you're making or what you're researching. So I don't want to get too far ahead of what we're doing this week. This week we're getting into some small groups to do some initial discussion on the research or creative project that you're interested in pursuing. So what are your ideas and thoughts, and what might be some things that you need to go and find? How can you share that with our class via these group discussions? I'm also looking to see if anybody maybe wants to partner up, do something kind of collaboratively. I'm open to that, but you guys kind of need to kind of get together if you're interested in that, and pitch me something, and we'll kind of come up with those parameters together. Like I said earlier, we'll have a few more group and class discussions kind of in between major deadline weeks. And we're getting these discussions started so that you guys have an ability to interact with each other and kind of have a sounding board about the projects that you're making, and the research that you're conducting. So this week we're just getting into these discussion groups, and let's just have a conversation. Let's just kind of interact about what we think we might want to make or research. I'm going to be trying to jump into those group discussions as well and kind of further things along as we go. But this group discussion is going to be due on Monday, the 29th. I don't have a minimum length requirement. I don't have a number of posts that you need to comment on each other's. I'm really just hoping that we can kind of have kind of a useful discussion for everybody that's about to kind of embark on this big project. So I will post that assignment in Canvas, and next week we'll get started on this big project.